The Independent Electoral Commission has officially launched its campaign ahead of local government elections planned for the end of October. Of course, we have to wait until the end of July and the report by Justice Dikgang Moseneke into the feasibility of holding free and fair elections during the pandemic. The IEC is confident it can do so safely. Political parties are split. But what about the voters with infrastructure and service delivery problems even in well-resourced cities such as Johannesburg, ongoing power outages, water supply interruptions? Does the average voter really believe their vote counts? I'm joined now by electoral systems researcher Letlhogonolo Letshile from the organisation My Vote Counts. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do you think the vote should go ahead at the end of October? Do you have a view on it, or are you happy to wait for Dikgang Moseneke's report?
Thank you, Sally. Good morning to the viewers. Currently, with the review panel happening, I think it's best to kind of wait for the assessment on whether it is possible to conduct free and fair elections in the context of the pandemic. I mean, we know there have been calls for the postponement due to, political parties not being able to campaign, and the risk of the virus. But, at the moment, I think it's best to get information from the review. And I know that a lot of people are making submissions there, which is stakeholders, political parties themselves, medical experts. So I think they do, in a sense, carry the views of the voters and the interest of the voters. So I believe, to an extent, that will be a fair assessment that we can wait for and take a lead from there.
I know that you're in electoral research, and I was wondering if you can give us an idea of how much appetite there is amongst the potential voters for this election. I know even the IEC, for example, is flagging that the youth vote, which is always a problem, is a particular worry for them. Tell us what you're seeing about interest in the vote.
There's a general decline in voter apathy in South Africa, even in the general elections. But I mean, also with local government themselves, they generally have a low voter turnout. This can be attributed to issues of how municipal departments are carrying, or municipalities are defunct. There's a lot of issues of corruption, so there is quite a low voter apathy for the vote. But I mean, we cannot sit behind the thought that say, people are not going to vote. I think it's important for the vote to go on, and people will generally come and say and cast their vote.
Do you think, and we're focusing so much on, every time before an election we do see more of a focus on service delivery, and very often a service delivery process is a result of a community not being heard. Very often you will find that community members have tried to appeal to authorities, tried to get the ear of authorities, and they just feel that they are not heard. We are now seeing unhappiness even in well-resourced areas, such as the city of Johannesburg. Do you think that these infrastructure problems, these constant power outages, the water supply issues, is that going to have an impact on how voters vote? And I ask that because the latest by-elections don't seem to show any big shifts. Is that a marker of how things are likely to go?
I think the social factor that you speak to in terms of how, these corrupt municipalities, lack of service delivery, I think that's the factor that kind of can tilt how the election is going to go. Because I know a lot of focus has been on the health consideration and the constitutional consideration on whether to have the election or not. But, little focus has been on the social aspect of the elections, looking at it and how much it matters whether we have an election or not. I mean, you rightfully put it that, people are exhausted with the type of service delivery that we have. So I think this is something that we should consider if you are going to postpone elections. So what happens to the people's rights to vote that particular representative out? So to an extent, you might be suppressing those people. And we know for a fact that municipalities are under pressure. So I think that is something that we really need to look into when we try and discuss whether to postpone the election or not, because we might see issues of civil unrest and political unrest if we decide otherwise.
Do you think there might be a change? Everyone says, well, if you're unhappy, change your vote. Vote a new councillor in. And, of course, local elections, part of that, is a direct vote for a local councillor who you very likely met and had a chance to interact with. And we keep hearing stories of how local councillors are not maybe doing what they should for people who are without electricity, who are having service delivery problems. Do you think that there might start to be a change, that we might see people going, hang on a minute, this person's not helped me in the last 4 years. I'm going to make a different decision?
To an extent, there's been conversations around electoral reform. I know that's happening at a national scale with the provincial and national elections, but I think the information can kind of cascade down to people, being alerted and be aware that, by the way, there's actually different people that you can vote for at the local government level. There's independent candidates running for elections as political parties. So I think the most important thing is people understanding their choices at that level, being able to vote for somebody that somebody that you have seen. There's new political parties as well that are coming into the space. There's always changes and there's always new voters as well. So I think it's really important to keep encouraging people to vote, but most importantly, keep encouraging people to vote effectively. If you have a large amount of people, like the youth, you said that they are not voting, but if they are not voting in numbers, what would happen hypothetically if that group would have, formed a political party and would have or probably feel that independent candidate, that kind of that can change the political landscape at that level. So this is what I mean by voting effectively, and giving power to the people. So I think these are some of the realizations that people need to have in how they can vote effectively in these upcoming local government elections.
We've seen that the IFP and the EFF are among those who want the election postponed. The ANC and the DA are keen to go ahead. Does that split and uncertainty, in your view, undermine the authority of this coming poll in any way?
It's a bit disturbing because if I recall, last year the ANC was on the same side as the IFP. With the parties that were calling for the postponement of the election. So I'm not too sure when the ANC kind of changed its position. But one thing that I would like to emphasize is that it's not up to the political parties alone to say that an election can be postponed. There's a constitutional mandate that needs to be upheld, and it needs to be an open process, and they needs to be consultative. So I think the review panel is kind of establishing this, and it's going to fill in that gap where people's opinions are going to be heard. So it's not entirely up to the political parties to decide that people are going to the polls or not.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. That was electoral systems researcher Letlhogonolo Letshile from the organisation My Vote Counts.